Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Midlife Crisis with your hosts,
Ashley
and Tracy. And today we're going to talk about 7 signs if you're having an early midlife crisis.
Yeah, it's, we've talked about how going into menopause and like all the physical things and, midlife starts happening generally in your 40s, sometimes not until your 50s.
Right.
And I always kind of thought, oh, I'm a little early to be experiencing all this stuff. I started perimenopause in my very early 40s. And so I was, a bit young to be going into that. But I am at a point in my life where my kids are grown, and which, most people are a little bit older.
Right.
But I started young. So, but yeah, I found this article that talks about people in their mid-30s.
Yes.
That are starting to experience symptoms of midlife crisis and not really understanding what it is they're experiencing and kind of in denial. Like, I'm too young.
Yes.
Like, why,
Well, don't
why
think
is this
that.
happening?
Yeah. Especially when you're in your mid to late 30s or even early 40s, because I think it's such a milestone when you hit that big 40.
Yes.
But it's just funny. You don't think of it initially when it's happening because you're like, what's happening to me?
And I think, too, generally in your 30s, your kids are pretty young.
Right.
Whether they be, preschool, elementary, middle school, whatever it might be. But, generally, it's like, I'm young.
Yeah.
I have a great family. I'm raising my kids. Or maybe you don't have kids. Maybe you're just going through life and traveling and working and focused on your career.
And being in your 30s because, you get out of your 20s when you feel so young, and 30s kind of,
it's like, okay, I have my job. I have...
Right. You're more established with everything,
exactly.
your family life and your career and all of that. And then you start going through changes that you don't even... perhaps aren't aware of, or realize.
So some of the signs that they talked about, and these are things that we've talked about, but again, I think it's important to address the younger people that might be experiencing some of these signs, and know, what, it is okay that you're experiencing this.
Yes,
there's nothing wrong with you. Welcome to midlife.
Right.
So one of them is constantly thinking about your regrets.
Yes.
I think sometimes when you do get to a point in your life where you're established, you do tend to reflect a little more.
Yes.
And, when you're trying to get established, you're thinking into the future so often.
Right.
And what are my goals? What am I trying to achieve? And you're working to that. And then you kind of get there and it's like, okay, now what?
Right.
And you start thinking about things that you've done in the past.
Reflect on the past versus looking towards the future.
Or maybe things you haven't done yet. Yes.
Like me was to travel. I've always wanted to travel. And I always thought, well, when I retire, I'm going to travel. And then I had this whole epiphany, like, let's just, what are you waiting for?
What are you waiting for?
Like, you can make it happen now.
Right.
So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Another one is being overwhelmed with the idea that you should be further along in your life. Sometimes maybe you're not quite established yet in the way that you hoped to be.
Or have had to face a crossroads and go into a different direction. Mm-hmm. So maybe you had a career path. And then for whatever reason have decided to take a different path, and maybe you're starting over again or thinking of starting over again because maybe you're in a rut where you are.
There's a lot of different things that can take you off your path. Maybe an unexpected pregnancy, maybe an unexpected breakup or divorce.
Yes.
Maybe someone in your family, whether it be your parents or, siblings, whatever, need your support and help, and you need to move back in to help them.
Yes.
I mean, there's a number of things that can take you off.
Your children grow up and leave the nest. Right. And all of those things that tend to add to that.
Yeah. Definitely can kind of force you to take a different turn.
Yes. And perhaps the uncertainty of it too.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
I think that's a big key of things, right?
I mean, that's a scary thing at any point in your life, but I think especially as you're going into midlife and experiencing all of these different symptoms, that's a very scary feeling and something that you kind of like dwell on, you know?
Yeah.
feeling like you might actually be losing your mind.
Oh boy, don't we both know that
one. Yeah,
so
I loved
well.
that one.
Yeah, and that's probably why we actually started this podcast, right? Is because we wanted to create that community, and within our own community, and knowing that and sharing that, we think you're losing your mind, or just how challenging things might be now, more so than they were before. So,
I think too, a lot of us in our group have made some drastic lifestyle changes, and that can be really challenging. Even though you're doing something better for yourself, it's really difficult to go, okay, I know I need to do this. I'm gonna do it. And it affects, we used to go out all the time. We used to drink a lot. And you just kind of get to a point where you're like, I'm not digesting this alcohol the way I used to.
And that's huge.
I feel like crap. I don't need to be going out and doing this all the time. Just little things like that, I never thought much about in my 20s and 30s. It was like, oh, no, we're going to meet for drinks. And now it's like, I might have a drink.
You can't continue to do the same things over and over again. And you're now experiencing different results. And you're like, wait a minute, what's happening?
Right.
But I think alcohol is definitely
huge. It's a huge one.
Yeah, it's high up there on the list because our bodies just don't absorb it the way it used to.
It definitely hits me different. We went to a brunch a couple of weeks ago for a birthday, and we didn't even, everybody was drinking, throwing mimosas back, but we were just both like, I just don't feel like it.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I've always been a lightweight, and I love being a lightweight. I just... pride myself on that. But even now, it's funny how I can have, 2 drinks one day and feel fine. And one day have the same 2 drinks and feel totally, very buzzed. Yeah. And it affects me so different. And I still haven't quite figured out what the difference is, day to day, and why my body reacts differently to the same levels of alcohol.
A number of things, like how much you ate that day.
I was going to say,
did you sleep well the night before?
Exactly, but none of that used to matter. Right. And I remember when I was younger and I first started out in advertising, I worked with these 2 gentlemen, and basically they were my mentors for, about my first 10 years in the industry. But and I was in my 20s back then, my late 20s, and I would roll in, during the week after, going out, and they would just laugh at me. They were, in their late 40s, 50s, and they would laugh at me, and they would say, oh, just wait until you get older. And I was like, just shoot me, okay? Like, if that ever happens to me, shoot me.
I remember sometimes pulling all-nighters. Like, well, at this point, I might as well not go to bed.
Exactly.
I have to work in the morning, so.
Because I had strong work ethics, I would show up for work, and I was productive and whatever, but I'll never forget them taunting me over that. And I remember saying, never, and just kill me. And now it's like, oh, you want to go out on a weeknight?
On a weeknight?
Oh my gosh. And when I do go out now, sometimes it takes a couple days for me to totally recover from it. And, but yeah, boy, what the difference it is now.
Well, and even, my kids, they're in their 20s, and a couple of them like to go out pretty often on the weekends with their friends.
Right.
And it's like, they'll tell me, we're meeting at 10 o'clock. I'm like, 10 o'clock?
The late night. I know. I'm in bed by then. It's like I do happy hour at 4:30. We're home by like 7, and by 9 I'm in bed. But yeah, that's funny. I remember that too. Remember you would have a couple drinks at home before you go pregame, and then go. And now it's like,
and then you're up till 2, 3, 4 a.m.
I know. It's just funny. It's so funny.
Those days are long over.
Yes, yes. And I don't miss it. It's not like I miss it or long for those days at all.
No.
And I figured I had a lot of fun. It's funny because I don't feel like I have a lot of regrets. Even choices that I made with my partners, you know, and things like that didn't work out. Because of my children, right? I don't regret those relationships because they provided me with my wonderful children that I love and adore.
And you wouldn't be who you are and where you are if you hadn't experienced those things.
Exactly. But I try to always live my life with few regrets. Like I didn't do anything super crazy, and I tried never to hurt people in anything that I did, but I did try to live my life with very few regrets.
Right.
And I feel very comfortable with that now. So when I do reflect back on my life, there's very few things. Of course, we all had those, situations or those cases where, coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Right.
Right. And in hindsight, now we know better. But for the most part, I'm pretty content with the choices that I made.
Yeah, I feel that way too. I think the only, and I've I've come to terms and accepted everything at this point, but I did go through a period of kind of regretting not parenting my kids in certain ways or doing things that I was so young and I was growing up too. And it, a lot of it is stuff that I didn't think too much about at the time.
Right.
But now I am. And, my daughter, she was her life was club soccer. We traveled everywhere. She missed quite a bit of school for it, but was a straight A student. I mean, just amazing athlete, amazing academically, and just didn't have time to date. Never really got boy crazy in high school, never really dated, had never been on a date. After she graduated, she started dating, and there was just this insecurity about her. She was very self-conscious and not really knowing her worthiness and you know what I mean? And it was just
100%.
like, and I think part of it was probably losing a little bit of her identity after soccer ended. And, it's, because again, from the time she was about 7 years old up until all through high school, that was her life.
Yeah, when I met you, she was in soccer, and you guys were hardcore.
So I just remember thinking, and then reflecting and looking at my boys and going, I wish I would have instilled more self-confidence in them. I wish I really made it a point to build them up.
Yes,
and
tell them how great they are.
I mean, I feel like I did that, but I was putting that on myself.
Yes.
Maybe I didn't do that enough. So just even little things like that, I really
100%
was struggling with.
Especially with children and raising children. I think in hindsight now, there are a lot of things that I wish I would have done more
or differently,
or focused on differently or anything. And for me, there's just so many things like you mentioned, self-confidence, building that up with the kids, but also life lessons. And because my children, there's, so much of an age span between my oldest and my younger two, that I had the opportunity to reflect a little bit of what I did with my oldest and how I would want to change things with my younger two. And one of those things was managing money.
Oh, yes.
Right. So, because that's a life skill that they don't necessarily teach in school.
Right.
But there are so many things. So I think to your point, I perhaps take that back. I do have regrets, but it's funny because most of them are about, parenting and things that I perhaps would have done differently then. But I think for the most part, our kids are wonderful. They've turned out great.
Yes.
And so that's a win everywhere.
And again, I mean, they're in their 20s. I have always told my kids, take this decade to learn a lot about yourself. That is, you don't need to be worried about being in a relationship. I mean, if you are, that's great. But this is the decade where you really spend a lot of time reflecting on who you are, what you want, what you don't want, what your goals are.
Right.
And that's all that matters.
Right.
You're in your 20s. You are all that matters.
Yeah.
And I had to do that while raising kids,
Yeah.
So obviously I'm like, don't make the mistakes I made. Not that I have regrets about it.
Right.
I'm thrilled. But yeah, I think a lot of it I was putting on myself.
Yeah.
And
they're
discovering
and as
themselves.
moms especially.
Yeah. And they're doing great. Both our kids are doing great.
Hold on.
Another one that they put on here was, you feel as if a piece of yourself is lost forever.
Oh, 100%. 100%. I think for me, I don't know why I think I know why. I think because I I never could envision myself growing old, being old. So that's always been something for me. Like when you lose your youth and you kind of feel invisible, and it's easy to look back and cling to what you once were. I know it's hard for me to wrap my own brain around that.
Yeah.
About being old and being content with being my age. And
yeah, I think for me, I mean, that definitely has been a bit of a challenge. I'm still young, so,
Yes.
I feel old, but
yes,
not that old, but
well, luckily now, like
now
40 is
it's
the new 30 and
Right,
50 is the new
right.
40 and all that. But it really is so because, back 60s and 70s, 40-year-olds were a lot different than the 40-year-olds of today,
Yeah,
right? And
absolutely.
50-year-olds and stuff.
Definitely. Yeah, but I think one thing I feel like I've lost about myself is just the ability to just be present and not...
Yeah.
I find myself constantly worrying about people, whether it's my kids or my mom or my partner or myself.
Yes.
I do that a lot, and I'm learning to let go of that and not hold so much of that. Therapy's helping with that a lot.
Yes, and we do promote therapy here. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find myself looking back at the younger me and thinking, I was so much more free-spirited. Why can't I just be like that now? Why can't I just it's fine. I don't have a care in the world. That's one piece that I really have a hard time with. And I'm trying to kind of find something similar to that in myself again.
Right.
So,
well, we had talked about joy earlier today before our session.
Yeah.
And how easy it is to have that joy and perhaps those endorphins when you're younger. But then all of a sudden when you're starting even early on, right, for midlife, and especially for females as our bodies change, it just kind of stops in that joy. It's like drawing a line in the sand. All of a sudden, you don't have a lot of joy in your life, and you're just like, what happened?
Right. Yeah. I don't find myself looking forward to things as much as I used to, or even planning as much as I used to, and doing, getting out and doing stuff. Like now it's like, I just want to sit on the couch and watch TV.
I know. Yes.
So, which is nice. I love that downtime, but it's also... like we talked about that night we all got together for the first time in a long time.
Yeah.
That was good for my soul.
Yeah.
And I need to do that for myself a lot more. Things like that.
Yeah.
And I think, for people in their 30s who are experiencing some of these midlife symptoms, life can be really monotonous even when you have little kids. Like it's, get them up, 100%. Get them ready, go to school, get them home, do their homework. Maybe you're working while they're at school, and then you got to hurry and get off work and go get the kids and then bathe them. And I mean, it's a lot, and it's just very monotonous.
And then it's like, okay, go to sleep, wake up, do it all again, the same thing again tomorrow.
And then the weekend is soccer games and volleyball games, and whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And you're not really thinking about yourself. You're not really... You know what I mean? It's just very robotic. It's like you're this machine.
Yes.
So I can see how some people might start experiencing some of this in their 30s, because that can be a really challenging place to be.
Yeah. And I think too that the world has changed since COVID. And I think that we were very fortunate in Arizona because it was very lax.
Yes. We had great weather.
We had great weather.
Able to get outside.
But the restriction level for us in Arizona was really only about 90 days.
Right.
Whereas compared to like California and New York and some of the other states where they were seriously in lockdown for years, it had a lot to do with, I think, mental health and anxiety and all of that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
But I feel like with us now in in our generation and everyone who was alive, and lived through COVID, that it did kind of change things for people a lot.
It made it very weird to socialize
social
again,
interaction.
Yeah, there was this anxiety around it for me.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings us to the next point. You feel isolated and alone despite having a supportive circle.
Yes.
Again, the pandemic, I think, was, affected people immensely in that way. And going back to being a young mom and just focusing on your family and your home and being robotic and just this machine that's pushing through. And even though you do have great friends and, potentially a great partner and family, you can feel very isolated.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the uncertainty that we all felt,
right.
Going through that because, nobody knew what was going on. Even, the leaders of the country, leaders of the world, nobody knew what was going on,
or how
what
to
to
handle
expect and how to handle it.
Right.
And I still think that we are 4 years later, right, still in the repercussions of that pandemic and, what it created, and especially for isolation purposes and socialization, because it just really tweaked everybody's brains, I think, to acceptable socialization and having kind of a fear of it as well, tying the fear to the social.
There's also the situations where the home environment might not be a healthy one.
Yes.
I did read somewhere that there was a huge uptick in divorces.
I could only imagine. Being stuck with people. I actually broke up with a 10-year relationship during COVID. But
I mean, and then,
hard.
There's the poor kids who maybe don't live in safe environments, and I think that it's definitely affected adults in many ways. But I have a few friends that are actually teachers, and it is absolutely terrifying the way it has affected these poor
children.
kids.
Yeah. And my oldest 2 grandchildren definitely fall into that category. So the younger one, he's 12, so he's bouncing back more so than his older brother, that's 14. And he is still doing online schooling. Next year he'll go to high school, but it really took an effect. It had an effect on him, and also with academically, because his grades diminished so much.
Well, I just don't
from having
think that we had nobody really had a good plan in place for how this would be handled, and so kids fell behind academically. My youngest was a senior in high school.
Right.
She left for spring break
And
early
never went
2020,
back.
not knowing she would never step on campus again.
Right.
And didn't get to go to prom, didn't get to do, a lot of the things that you do at the end of the year, didn't get to graduate. It was a slideshow in our living room.
Sad. Yeah. No kidding.
And then started her freshman year in college online in her bedroom.
Yeah.
So I think it was really challenging in that.
And also for parents, because a lot of parents had to homeschool their children as well as
work. Yeah.
So and it's funny, I think it's almost a breath of fresh air when you see a lot of high profile individuals kind of fessing up to how difficult it was for them.
Yes.
And I think it just kind of normalizes it for everyone else that, that they're not alone.
Right.
But that isolation is something, and you can be in a relationship and feel so alone. We both have experienced that in our past.
Yes.
But isolation is something, even if you have, a great support group of friends, it's still
you can still feel lonely.
Yeah. And isolated. And even if you share and all those kinds of things, and it's sad for me because I feel very comfortable now in isolation, where I didn't so much before. I was always on the phone and being more social, and now I've just really taken so many steps backwards and feeling with isolation, and not feeling isolated, but feeling that that's kind of my new norm.
Enjoying it.
Enjoying it.
Yeah, and it's hard to know. I mean, obviously the pandemic, this is a result of that, but it's also something that, we're both going through midlife. Yeah. So it's like, well, would it have been this bad if the pandemic didn't happen, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's so hard. We don't know. It's hard to know.
Yeah,
you don't know what you don't know, and
right.
Unfortunately, we didn't have a choice in it. We were all thrust into it, globally. But I do think that it definitely has had an effect,
absolutely,
on society as a whole, right? And it's sad but true. But coming out of it is good. You have to just push yourself.
Right. I think just finding ways to build yourself up when you're feeling isolated or lonely. Sometimes it's nice to enjoy time with yourself.
Yeah.
And whatever that's doing, whether it's some form of exercise, going for a walk, reading a book, watching a great documentary, which I love to do.
Yes.
Anything like that.
Yeah. I think exercising is so... I can't stress how much the importance of exercising is to create those endorphins. Yes. Because, although diet is important too, there's, everything that we always talk about that's important with midlife health. But exercising and creating those endorphins. Just
moving your body. Yeah.
Moving your body. And I think you see an immediate result from that.
Absolutely.
So pushing
mentally
yourself.
And physically.
Yes, both. 100%. 100%.
Another point they said was you feel like you've wasted a large portion of your life and that you'll never get that time back. For me, the only thing I found relatable to that, because I don't, in general, I don't feel that way.
Right.
But I was in a long-term relationship, 6 years too long. And it was really tough. It was very abusive, verbally and physically. And I just really, really, even during it and up to the point when I finally left, and it was very hard to leave because, I had to get restraining orders. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
That's how bad it was. But I felt so much guilt for dragging my kids through that. And I lost myself during that time. I felt so weak and tried so many times to leave. And it was just so much easier to go back every time because it was just relentless, like stalking. And so it was just like, fine.
Right.
Well, let's get back together, And,
right.
And so I felt for a long time like that was a chunk of my life that I'll never get back and that I really regretted. Because I put my friends through it. I put my family through it. I put my kids through it. My mom would come down to visit me and leave crying because she was just certain that she might not ever see me again.
Wow.
It was terrible.
And I remember those days too.
Yeah. You were around for that.
Days,
you were around for that.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I was able to escape with a lot of support from law.
Yes.
And I've kind of come to terms with it. My kids are older now and I've talked with them about it. And I'll never forget one of my sons shortly after I left, this man, he wrote a paper for school about what he did over the summer. And in part of the paper, he said, I learned a lot about self-respect.
Wow.
Which makes me want to cry.
Right.
But I just, as heartbreaking as that was, I was like, okay, good.
Right.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad that's what he's taking
from
this.
Learn through me and my mistakes.
Yes.
And,
So, that's a chunk of my life that, I wish I could take back. Yeah. But I also have come to terms with it. And after, talking with my kids, I know how much they took from it in a positive way.
Right.
And for me, it taught me a lot about myself.
Yeah.
And
I think a lot of us have, periods of time where you wish you could, take it back and, in hindsight, go back and do things differently. But ultimately, that's just a part of life, right? It is. It's sad, but it's true. And, but you have miraculously, gone away from that and created such a wonderful life for you and your family, and now with your children being older that you can speak to them about it, and I think that's very healthy.
Having the support from you guys, my tribe, my family, my kids, fortunately I was able to get the strength to leave and not go back, and it's just amazing to me. I became a lot more grateful for that support.
Yeah.
And I think realized it more.
Right.
So there's, it could be anything though. There's, a lot of times people feel like, oh, I wish I could get those years back,
Yeah, because there are people that have had or that are in successful relationships, and I'm just so jelly of those people. And, and I watch the Hallmark movies and I see that, and I know I'm the hopeless romantic, and I believe in it. I only have a couple of friends I can count them on one hand,
yeah,
that have had successful relationships and are still in a successful relationship. But I even think when you're in that success, that bond and you're in a healthy relationship, there's still, perhaps isolation. You still have a lot of things, and especially for females, that their body starts changing and their emotions change.
And a lot of times, I mean, if you're in, a relationship with a man, they don't really know or understand what's going on. So that makes you feel even more alone,
right? Yeah.
So the last point they had on here was your thoughts about your future are bleak. And we kind of touched on this earlier. Right. It can, be very dooming and, terrifying.
And the joy's gone from your life, right?
Right.
You didn't have to, you would just wake up and you'd be joyful and, today. And I don't know, for me, it's difficult when I wake up. I don't have that joyfulness anymore. Right. And I feel like it's kind of forced or, definitely focused on for me to have that level of joy. But I do believe that it's coming back and it will come back.
Yeah.
But there's that acceptance period that's difficult.
I find myself just kind of getting overwhelmed with like, okay, what do I have to get done today? Outside of work, there's so many other things I've got to do. And I still have a lot of things going on with, my kids. And so it's kind of like this overwhelming, like, oh my gosh,
and
another day.
Yes, and where we didn't have that before. We were queens of multitasking and doing everything, and
we were machines.
Yeah, and we were powerful, and we just powered through. And 100%. Things are different.
I think too, because my kids are grown and gone. Like I don't have that distraction of. Right. Being that machine and just like, okay, we got to do, they got school, they got sports, they got this, they got, and even through high school when they had jobs and they had, it was like, I was constantly still managing the household.
Oh, 100%.
And now it's like, now what?
Yeah. And I feel overwhelmed when I have just a couple things on my calendar for the week. And it's so funny. Yeah. Or I'll even have anxiety about next week because I know that I've got like 3 things on my calendar when I used to do so many things simultaneously.
I mean, I used to travel for work. I would go out of town for 3 days and cram like 9 meetings in those 3 days. Yes. And I was doing that at least twice a month, if not 3 times a month. Yeah. And on top of it, traveling for soccer.
Right.
So, and it was like nothing. And now it's like, oh my gosh, I have a conference call today. Like I get this like anxiety about it.
I know. So I guess the question is if you're experiencing those early symptoms, of midlife crisis and you're perhaps in your 30s or maybe even 40s, but it's kind of taken you by surprise. Maybe, first thing I would suggest is, going to your doctor and getting a full panel on your hormones just to see where that is. And we've talked about, utilizing hormones and it's for some people and not other people, but I think it's important to know what your body
physically
is doing, right? And any changes that you're going under, and then, coming up with a plan based upon those results. Right. But I think it helps the mind to know that the tests might show that your hormones are unbalanced and, steps to take to get back balance in your life. But I think it starts with getting a full panel, blood work done on your hormones, as well as, other things. If
thyroid, all that.
To see what it is. And then, coming up with a plan, right, of action.
And, it might not be a physical thing. Talk to your friends. Ask them if they're experiencing the same things. Go see a therapist, If it's getting too overwhelming and you feel like you're losing yourself, sometimes it's nice to find a professional that, validates what you're experiencing.
100%. And that can provide you tools to overcome those challenges. I think that's huge. Huge.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for joining us. That wraps it up for today. And that just about wraps it up for today. Thank you for joining us on Let's Talk Midlife Crisis. Embrace the change.
Join the conversation on our website at letstalkmidlifecrisis.com or our Facebook or Instagram and YouTube channels. We'd love to hear from you guys.